Today on Business Journey Unlocked, I'm joined today with Joe Conley, CEO of Royce Security Services, Metro Safety and Security, and the founder of American Standard Holding. Joe works with organizations across Ohio, Northern Kentucky, Michigan, and New York that navigating a market where security failures can mean lawsuits, loss of assets, or worse, and where the lowest bid often comes with the highest risk. Joe, thank you so much. Welcome to the show. I'm going to turn it over to you to explain what you're all about.
Kevin, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Yeah, so I got into the security world just by chance around 1995. I'd always been in sales, and I was looking for a sales job that would kind of keep me at home. I had a job at the time where I was doing a lot of traveling. At the time, I just got uh, full custody of my two kids. At a
Mhm.
time, we're about 4 and 2 years old, so I couldn't travel. And so I had to find something where I was home each night. Um, so I started working for a very small firm in a sales role, and had no idea. Never was part of law enforcement, military, no background in the security field, but I just needed a job, and I found a job selling security services. And I think that was around 1994.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting because you do need that stability, especially with your family. It is very hard to be apart from them. Focusing on Royce, you didn't start that from scratch, and you mentioned
No.
that you started in the mid '90s, but you actually didn't buy it until 2001, turning it into where it is now. What was kind of broken within that business when you first took the control back in the mid '90s to early 2000s, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, the first firm that I was with was not Royce Security. So I stayed at that first firm for about a year and a half. Joined Royce Security around 1996. The company, the Royce Security, was a division of a larger group that had both a janitorial firm and a security guards firm. Um, I came into the company to manage the security firm. Um, at the time, they were very, very small. They were losing business. They were thought of in the local market as just the low end game in town. The low bidder,
Hmm.
the low wage guards, things like that. So I worked very hard at that time. Starting out to kind of change that. The first thing that we needed to do was change the perception of who Roy Security was, and at the time they weren't looked on very favorably in the market.
So what exactly did you change within the market? Because I do agree it does come on with perception. It's about how you perceive not only yourself within the organization, but it's also how the business in and of itself was able to pivot. And I mean, you've been doing a good job since when you became CEO. It's been almost 30 years, right?
Yeah,
So there's
yeah.
something
So
that you were doing in order to actually make the execution. What was it?
yeah, so from the time that I joined the company in 1996, so I bought the company from my former boss in 2001. It was all about building the the brand back up, and really based on providing better service than what they had been doing. And by
Hmm.
that, I mean, most customers that hire a contract security guard firm, they're not hiring us for the particular guard. They're hiring it for the management of those guards, right?
Correct.
Be, because they don't want to do it themselves. If they wanted to manage a guard force, they all could, right? They could hire their own people and make them security guards, but they don't want to manage that, right?
Hmm.
So they hire us. We needed to change the way that we managed our folks. We needed to put more time into training our people. Um, we needed to put more time into the actual management of the product, which is a security guard dude that we were putting out on your property. Okay. And, I always say supervision, supervision, supervision. Okay. So we needed to spend more dollars and more time being out in the field, managing and supervising those guards. And, that's, kind of how we changed the level of service that we were given. And that started to change the perception of Royce.
Hmm. It's always interesting stepping back from Royce for a second, but it's also very interesting when I have founders and CEOs that have multiple businesses, because it's very hard to learn and scale one business, but let alone multiple businesses as well, on top of what you're doing at Roy's, but with Metro and also with American Standard Holding. Metro is pretty much the same exact thing as Roy's if you kind of strip all the layers down. What exactly was that game plan when you first initially became the founder back in 2013 with that? What
Well,
was the game plan?
Metro Security came when I acquired a small security guard company
Okay.
down in Columbus. The Metro Security is a division that we still have today that provides more security in the technology space, cameras and
Hmm.
alarms and those kind of things. So it's still pretty small for us right now, but it's just a different service line for us that we can offer.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. It's just you're doing two different, even though you're in security, it's two separate things. You got the physical security on this side, then you got the surveillance on the other, and especially with the surveillance, all these different types of softwares, tools, the AI that's coming up. I've spoke to other founders and leaders in the video surveillance space who are using AI monitoring within their system, obviously with human intervention, right? So like certain ideas like that and certain patterns like that do allow some leeway in terms of how much manpower you really need, but it can't ultimately be solved with just solely depending on all these different programs and AI because it's not 100% accurate. In human nature, nothing is 100% accurate. So with that in mind, it's good to have those type of services on top of human intervention. Now with Metro, is that more of just like products or is it actually video surveillance? And if it is video, are you also or maybe thinking about implementing such services that other video surveillance companies
Yeah,
are doing?
yeah. Um, we are actually now getting into more of the monitoring. Um, I personally and a lot of people feel that the boots on the ground, security guard business is never going away, right?
No, no. No,
But
sir.
we can supplement that with the great technology that's out there now. The AI that's out there now, right? So we have these, you know, live monitored, live talk down, solar powered, camera units. Okay. That, we can put those out there on a post as opposed to a guard can live monitor it.
Hmm.
And when we see something, we can live talk, to that people. So, you know, traditionally a surveillance camera is just static, right? It's there, it's a camera. The bad guys don't really care about them because no one's really watching it, right? Just being recorded, okay? These cameras are live, okay? So when we see something, we can actually talk right through that and say, "Hey, you in the pink shirt, we see you." Okay, that gets their attention. Like, "Hey, that's a live person. They actually see me. They see my pink shirt." Right? That's different. So that's using technology the same way that we would use a live person, on that post, right? And then the backup can come from that live person.
Well, you're just talking about being reactive instead of proactive, right? And I feel like that's the most beautiful thing, especially in the world of security when you're not physically there and actually are surveilling. Just to go on a little example, going back on the individual that I brought on, he told a story that he was able to save a girl's life because
Absolutely.
there was an incident that happened, and if they didn't have that type of security where the AI was actually being reactive instead of proactive, then she would have died in a stairwell, at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. But because they have these certain protocols and softwares in place to be reactive instead of proactive, they were able to execute a strategy plan, call the police, call the ambulance, and everything. And she's still alive, thank God. But it's just certain situations like that because you never know what can happen. Everything could switch on a flip, right? And it's just having those programs in place, again, being reactive, monitoring 24/7, having people on the back end not physically there because you can only have so many people, but you can actually just keep on switching. People can be at a desk, they can watch what's happening, they can see everything. And maybe if they're away, the AI can do certain programs where they can see certain stuff. But even then, with all these different programs, it's hard to have the knowledge base in order for the program to distinguish little kids running, playing, and little kids running away from a perpetrator. Right? It's just having the accurate information within your database that really facilitates like what exactly are you doing with this information,
Well,
right?
that's where that's where the live monitor starts, right? I mean,
Yeah,
they could get pinged, okay, when something is seen, okay, but as it stands right now, the technology is not quite there yet to
correct.
distinguish a threat from just a person, walking by the camera, right?
Mhm,
But it pings someone and says, "Hey, there's somebody on property," right? Then a
mhm,
live person steps in, you know, for the monitoring. But to your point, Kevin, I mean, I would hate to be a property owner, a property manager that could only, come in the next day and watch a recording of a violent crime that took place, on their property, but had
yeah,
no way to stop it. I'd hate to be that person. Okay.
mhm,
Proactive is what these solutions are, whether it's a security guard there on site or a live monitored system like the one that I'm kind of speaking of now.
mhm. Given the industry you're in, a lot of competitors undercut either, with sending guards with less training. For example, I know Allied is a big institution within the country that does cheap training, and it's just the turnover rate is very huge, right? I mean, given what you built a 40-hour training program where you can have the standard in place within your organization, within the individuals that you actually hire. Given that, what's one standard you kind of refuse to compromise, even if it kind of costs you either a contract, people to hire, location, because you've seen these certain protocols, measures, or even security providers cut those same corners, and in the long run, it didn't facilitate and go out the way that they hoped it would be.
Yeah, for us, I mean, I have stopped, a long time ago bidding on jobs against the competition. Okay. I have to bid on what I know works for us, right?
Mhm,
And for it to work for us, that means we have to be able to, build into our service rates a level of training and supervision that I believe that it takes to provide quality security services. Okay. So we're not going to compromise on that. So it's simple to say that we won't, compromise, on our cost, on our service rates. But it's more than just the dollars, okay? It's what we can do with the dollars when we do not compromise, on our margin, okay? We can spend those dollars to have the type of training and supervision that we know that it takes to provide a level of service that is needed.
mhm.
Uh, So I will not compromise on our price, but I won't compromise on our price because of what we're going to do with that margin.
Right, it's just, you're having the quality. There's a lot of people that try to get these security guards or even EPs, for example. They like the idea of having all this fine wine, but they're expecting to pay beer prices, right? And that's just not how it goes. You're paying for the quality. Now, if you want to just have a person there, then sure, yeah, go with Allied, right? I mean, they're a pretty prominent company within the country. Not saying that they're good, they're just well known. There's a difference between
Yeah, I
being
mean, they're
well
the
known.
largest. I mean, they're the largest company in the world, the largest security guard company in the world, and I'm not going to talk negatively about any other firm that's out there. But we just stopped worrying about what the other guy was doing.
Mhm,
We have to be
exactly.
able to provide the service that we provide. And I was told, I mean, about 15 years ago, I was having lunch with with a customer. I'm here in Cleveland, and very prominent real estate owner, manager, a developer. And he told me something straight out. He said, until we hired Royce, we always viewed security guard services as just a race to the bottom, and we would just keep taking the lowest bid. It would come in strong for a while, but then that lowest bid eventually would mean bad service, and we'd fire them and go out to bid again and get the next lowest bid, and they would be okay for a while, and we'd fire them. So that's we we do not want to be part of the race to the bottom, in the guard business.
Now, let me ask you this. How were you able to articulate your differences comparing how they viewed other vendors, other security companies? Because you just mentioned that they just hire people to hire them and they go for the lowest barrel. Like, what was it within your process of vetting them, understanding about what you do with your company in order for them to actually take you and pay for the quality instead of actually the quantity of service?
Well, you just it starts by you know sticking to your price, right? I
Mhm,
mean, if I give you a, a, a price and then you can negotiate that price down with me, then what does that tell you about our service,
mhm,
right?
exactly.
I mean, if so, it's convincing the customer that our price is this, and you're going to get this, this, and this. Okay, with that price. Okay, you're going to get the training up front, and then you're going to get what I always call just supervision, supervision, supervision. Okay, we spend more money on field supervision than probably any guard company the same size as us.
Hmm,
We put a lot of money into having people out in the field, knowing what our security officers are doing on your property. We spend a lot of money on that.
right.
So, so if I'm going to let you negotiate my price down, your question should be, but does that mean I'm going to get less training and less supervision? And the answer would have to be yes, because I know that at this price, I can provide you with the level of service that I know that it takes, right? But if you want me to be lower, then yeah, then I can't do some of these things. And oh, by the way, I'm not going to go that route because then we suffer. The company suffers. The reputation gets bad. The customers eventually not happy, right?
Mhm,
And they don't remember then when they're not happy that they've asked us to go lower, right? They just see the day to day service that's bad, right? So we're not going to do that. So it's, stick to your price and convince the customer what they're going to get, for that price, and then stand by it and deliver it. Okay. That's the most important thing, right? Not just a promise, right? But stand by it and deliver it. And I know that we deliver on the supervision, part of that. We're out there. I have people out in the field 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in all our branches in all of our markets, that their whole job is to supervise those security officers that are on those job sites.
mhm. It's also going to the communication aspect as well. There's a lot of security companies that don't really communicate effectively as they should within these contracts that they have on the location, the host, and what happens then they don't really see the ROI. The host doesn't really see the ROI because when they just see the security guard just sitting there, they don't really like what are they doing, right? But there's so much behind the scenes that they don't know what's going on in order for them to actually be sitting there, in order for the location to be, running smoothly. Stuff like that kind of goes past certain people's minds, but it just goes to show that once actually something does sort of hit the fan, so to speak, then they're like, "Oh my gosh, where's the security guard?" Well, the security guard's over here doing all the stuff. So it just depends on the programs you have and the procedures you have within those contracts to articulate it. Communication not just in the security world, but just with having vendors, having clients as well. It's the most important thing that I feel like certain companies do lack, and then it makes people think like, what exactly are they doing? Right. You mentioned the quality of service that you have within your organization, not just in terms of the people who you hire, but also in relation to the price point you have. Given where you are right now, you're able to say no to certain contracts. But when you first started, it was very hard to say
Yeah,
no with any business.
we didn't say no a lot back then, right? Y- if it was work, we took it, right? Because we needed to. But
Yes.
fortunately, we've been able to scale our business to a point where we can say no. Okay, and sometimes the best deals are the ones that you say no to, right? The
Hmm.
best contracts are the ones that you don't do, that you don't take. Um, but yeah, there's a lot, as you said, that goes into what the what the expectations are for a security officer on site. I mean, if this customer is paying for our security, personnel to be at this doorway, and that's it, and something goes on somewhere else, on the property, it's unfortunate, but our security officer's orders are to be in this one spot. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, people, they don't always see that. Visitors to that shopping mall or healthcare facility, they don't always know what that security officer is supposed to be doing. Okay. So when something is taking place and the security officer is not there, they view it as the security officer is not doing his job, right? Well, he is doing his job. Unfortunately, that facility wants us right here, not on the next floor or the next parking lot or whatever.
A lot of these companies that hire a bunch of different security companies, they think that these security companies can be fluid, but they can't really. If it's not in the contract and legally binding, they can't do anything. And if they do something, then that could be retribution to you and your company, on a legality aspect. There's so much that goes into it that they have to really understand what exactly is their scope of work that they're looking for within their organization. Now, within your process, since owning not only Royce but also Metro, and I'm not too sure Metro has uh, a stake into this question, but what was the pivot within your processes within your business that you were able to say no to certain contracts? Was it just the revenue was really good at the time? Was it how many people you had within the organization? Were you just getting a lot of contracts coming your way? Like, what was the pivot where you were able to actually be more qualifiable for certain contracts instead of just taking whatever came to your table?
Well, the pivot, Kevin, I think was that we were starting to get more partners and not just more customers. Okay,
Okay.
and there's a difference between a partner and a customer. So I mean, I would have been more than willing to stay small with the right partners, right? Partners that were willing to pay for quality service. The partners that are willing to, work, with us to form a partnership to be able to provide the best service, for their job site, for their property. When you start to, so when you start to be, when you start to provide a better level of service and start to gain true partners in that, and not just new customers, then then you're more likely to say no to some of the contracts that is just going to be a new customer and not a partner.
Mhm. Given the personnel you have within your companies, I mean, you're managing hundreds of security officers across multiple locations. I've spoke to a lot of operators in labor-intensive businesses, a lot of different CEOs, founders in the security space as well, and a couple of challenges come down to some key areas you're talking about: sales, operation, fulfillment and delivery. The contracts as well. Coming from a business perspective within your businesses, what would be one area that you want to fix and improve going into 2026 across Metro or Royce?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge for us is always going to be people, right? We're in the people business. Our product is strictly our people, right?
Right.
It's service, right? Provided by security officers. The labor markets these days are very tough. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
We have to we have to recruit a lot harder and bring in a lot more people to sit in front of us to hire less people than we ever have. Okay. So it's taken bringing in a lot more people to even, hire. We're, we're only, we're only able to hire fewer people than we used to by bringing in though a whole lot more people. Okay. The level of a labor market out there right now is, pretty stale, pretty tapped out. Um, but the reverse of that, though, Kevin, is that when we find those, good ones, and they're out there, there's good people out there that still want to work, right? And we find those, we bring them in, and then it becomes about, you know, the onboarding and the culture, the retention, things like that. And that's one of our big, goals, this year to really focus on that.
Culture is very important, and there have been a couple other people mentioning that as well in relation to their company, because culture does help promote incentives. It helps promote, a brotherhood, so to speak, right? There's so many people that come into these organizations that think for themselves, but then you're all a one man band, you're a one man team. Like, everybody's in it for everybody, not just for yourself, right? I feel like there's some people that kind of neglect that thinking. And just give you example, for your security officers, they can't just up and leave. They have to wait for them to be relieved, right? What happens if the next person doesn't come? Then that person that's still on shift has to wait, right? And the person that's not there doesn't really think about the consequences until they're in their shoes. They're the ones waiting for people to relieve them, right? Just going back to the selfishness, especially with the civilian side, there's a lot of people that don't think about that one man band, but talking to a bunch of veteran owned security companies, right? They always think for each other, not just for themselves. They think as a group, not just individual.
Right.
Because in the military and law enforcement, you're all together. You're a one man team. You strip down the individuality in order for you to promote the central mind, right? Especially within security, not just in security, but also industries as well. There's a lot of people using ChatGPT, all these different LLMs to make their resume, their cover letters just exceptional, right? But when you actually meet the person, what happens? They're not who they turn out to be on the sheet, on the piece of paper. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but when you're looking for that talent, that experience, it's hard once that's on paper, but when you actually meet the person, it's a whole different story, right? And then just there's so many other factors that come into it. How do they process certain situations, right? I feel like you can be a really good security guard. You can have all this experience. You can have the status of working at the top tier security companies, but if you can't handle yourself under pressure, why would I want to work with you? Why would you want to be in my business if you don't have that competency? There's really
Right.
no point and flashing your ego, so to speak, as opposed to what can you do within yourself when you have to handle tough situations. Because there's a lot of people, it's either fight or flight. They either run away from the situation or run to it. And the people that you want within your organization are the ones that are running to it, not from it.
Yeah, well, Kevin, in the, unarmed security guard sector, right? We would all like to get, all security guard companies would love if, the people that were coming through our doors for jobs were, ex-law enforcement, ex-military. Okay. Unfortunately, it's not. I mean, certainly, we do get some of that, right? Okay. All guard companies get some of that. Okay. But beyond that, we just have to look for the good people,
Hmm.
work ethic people, people that have some, let's call it sense, to them, right? To be able to think a little bit, on their feet, right? And then we can train them to be a good security officer. Okay. I mean, yeah, we would love to get all, ex-military guys in here, right? Those guys are fantastic. Because, like you said, the work ethic, the team, okay, they don't let their team down, right? They don't let their teammates down, right? That's great. Okay. We don't get a lot of those. We try to. We want to get more. But besides that, we have to find the best people out there that we can mold into a really high level security officer.
Hmm.
And we can do that. If someone wants to come in to us and they really want to work and they have some good, common sense about them, we love those people and we can train those people. And I have people that are here for years and years and years that came to us with no background in the guard business or the military or law enforcement. I mean, like me, I'm one of them. I came into this business with no background, right? Um, so we can work with those folks, okay? If they want to work and they want to learn, we can train them to be good security officers.
Hmm. Yeah, because you were in their shoes, and I do agree, you can train somebody to have the skill set, but you can't really train their determination, their drive to
You can't
actually
train work
succeed.
ethic. You cannot
Correct.
train work ethic. They either got it or they don't,
Correct.
at least in my opinion.
Especially within my generation, there's so many people that just frankly don't wanna work. I mean, I have friends of
Don't get me
mine.
started. Don't get me started. Just kidding.
But it is very bad, and, it really deteriorates the whole job market, not just in security, but just the whole job market in and of itself,
Yeah.
and it's very hard if you don't know people within security, it's very hard to get started. A lot of people getting started in those types of situations, they start at the big brand, Allied and all these other big brands companies because they're taking anybody that they could. Right? And then they actually see the culture, and it just depends on what exactly do they want within themselves. There's a lot of people that stay within Ally. There's a lot of people that stay within your organization. It just depends on their personality, what they're looking for, what's their goal, their vision, and that's a very big thing. Like, what exactly do they want to do? Do they want to stay within that role for 5, 10 years, or do they want to move up? It depends on their work ethic, their experience, their drive, because a lot of people get comfortable. They get comfortable in their lives, they get comfortable within their job. Not saying that's necessarily a harmful thing, but in order for you to grow and achieve the results that you want within not only your professional life, but your personal life as well, you have to get uncomfortable. especially with you, with your experience. You did a lot of uncomfortable things to get where you
Absolutely.
are right now within Metro and Royce.
Absolutely. I mean, look, if somebody wants to, start with us and they're perfectly, content or happy staying, as a security officer, and they're a good security officer, and they go to work every day and they do their job, and they want to stay there, that's great. But we do need a percentage of our labor force to want more than that, right?
Mhm.
Companies can only grow with people, right? You need to have the right people, within your organization to grow. So we definitely look for those folks too. Okay, the other ones are fine. They're here, they're doing their job, they can stay forever. But we do want the ones that want more. And I can tell you this: that all of our, starting from our level of field supervision, all of those folks started off as guards for us. So they had that drive to go to that next step. And then in some cases, they went, to that next step and that next step. So we do have a lot of people here that started off with us as guards that are now in some kind of management role or a supervisory role. And we love those people. That's how a company grows.
I find that where the job market is right now and just the expectation of going to a new company, a lot of people think that they want to start at the top, right? But you have to start at the way bottom and grow and climb up that ladder. For example, with the people that you have with the field supervision, they started as security guards, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of people that want to start at that field supervision role, but you
Yeah.
can't unless you have the experience. But there's so many people, especially with social media and the internet and technology, that there's a lot of people that just want to have that instant gratification. They want to get the best of the best the second they go into a company, but that's not how it works. They need to start as a security guard within your organization and just work their way up. And that's the thing, people just don't wanna do that. They don't want to embrace the suck, but in order to have a fulfilling life, going back to what we mentioned, you have to be in an uncomfortable state in order to get where you wanna go.
I mean, Kevin, I always say you have to do the hard things for the easy life, right?
Mhm.
Anything that you want in life that's good is going to be hard to get it, right?
Mm. Yes,
I
sir.
teach kids that. I mean, you have to do the hard things if you want an easy life. But yeah, I mean, these days, I mean, people, will come in and they want the money before they ever work. I mean, they want more money. I mean, the conversations that I've had with people that come in, they take a job. We don't lie to them. We tell them what the job is, what the hours are, and what the starting pay is. Okay, and a week or two later, they want more money.
Mm.
Well, we didn't lie to you. We told you, what the job was. We told you where it was. We told you the hours. We told you the pay. And now, just that fast, before you even, you know, try to prove yourself, you want more money, put the work in. Okay, the money will
Exactly.
fall. I mean, don't I mean, I would be. I mean, I would sound silly if I said to someone that money's not important, right? I mean, we all need to make X, right? Whatever we have going on. So I will never be foolish enough to say to someone that money's not important. But if money is the only motivator that you have to work hard, then you're never going to get anywhere
Mhm.
because a good company is not going to pay you more until you show them that you're worth it.
Mhm.
And I'm happy to pay people more when they're worth it. I want to pay everybody more money. That means they're all doing a great job, right? That's my goal. But show me, right? Show me something. Give me something, right? Before you ask for that first raise.
I do agree, actions speak louder than words, and it's just like you want to have the quality within those certain individuals. I'm a very firm believer that as long as you enjoy what you do, whether that's working at a job, running your own company, multiple companies, whatever you do within your life, as long as you truly enjoy what you do, the money will follow you. But if you're just so focused and determined to make as much money as possible, you're just gonna be attached to that outcome, and then you won't have a fulfilling or enjoyable life because once you are able to detach from those certain outcomes and just figure out what exactly it is you really enjoy within working at the company you work for or the industry that you're in, once you figure out those aspects, then you won't really care about the money. You know, there's people that, for example, my mother, for example, she doesn't know how much she makes, but she really enjoys what she does because my father takes care of all the finances, right? You know, the dad, the father, the husband's always taking care of the finances most of the time. But what I'm saying is she really enjoys what she does and she doesn't know how much she makes.
Yeah.
But what I'm going at is if you really enjoy with what you do, then the money won't be the biggest determination. But I do agree with what you're saying. Like if you are really focused on the money, why should I give you a raise? For example, on what you said, person only been there for 2 weeks. 2 weeks is nothing in the long scheme of things. You know, you've been running this business for almost 30 years, right? What's
Right.
2 weeks to you? 2 weeks is just a grain of salt. But within their eyes, they think 2 weeks is like 2 years. It
Right.
just depends on the perception that they have and, you know, their personality, their experience, their determination.
Well, I mean, we're, unfortunately, I think, and I'm old, so, so I have, different opinions maybe than some other people. But, I think that, society the way it is now, we are raising a generation of, instant gratification seekers, right?
Yep.
And it's just unfortunate. And all of that comes from, kids being spoiled, social media, instant, 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 I mean, but that's, to me, that's, so foreign, right?
Mhm.
I mean, to me, you had to work. You had to get up every day and go to work. And if you wanted to make more money, you worked hard and you stayed at your job and you didn't, bounce jobs to try to chase, an extra 50 cents here or $5,000 more a year there. You stayed at your job and, you proved yourself and you worked hard. I don't think there's a lot of that mentality left today. It's, instant gratification. Now, there is a lot of smart, young people these days that can do a lot of stuff with, technology and those things, right? So those jobs are probably going to, start out at way more money than I ever started out at when I was, in that age group. So that's great, but still though, you got to prove yourself.
Exactly.
Stay with the company. I mean, I, I got an application for a manager's position that I had posted on LinkedIn, and the guys had literally, this is no exaggeration. The guy had 27 jobs in the last 12 years. 27. I mean, he had them all listed. He had 27 jobs in the last
Holy
12
shit.
years. He's a job hopper, right?
Mhm.
I mean, 27 jobs in 12 years. He's either a horrible worker and he's getting fired, or he's chasing, chasing, chasing.
Well, there's also a lot of people that take jobs for a certain period of time in order to, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, they're able to like, once they get fired from the job, for example, they're able to collect that, you know, unemployment income, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot of people that do that because they wanna work for a certain period of time, and then they just want to live off of other people's, you know, hard-paying workers that pay for unemployment, right, within our taxes. And it's very narcissistic of somebody to do that because that just shows how selfish they are in a way. Not saying they're totally selfish, we don't really know what's going on within their lives, but what I'm saying is, for your example, the person with 27 jobs within the past 12 months, I would have a
Oh,
10-foot
12 years.
pole
12
from
years.
that. Yeah. Oh, 12 years?
12
Yeah.
years. Well, 12
But
years.
still, regardless, like it shows that this person doesn't have the loyalty or the standards you have that you're looking for within your business, within your workers. It's all based on one person's standards. Now, somebody could hire them and it may be a really good candidate, but what they have on paper more or less dictates on how they would be within your organization, you know?
I mean, for me, it's just about, proving yourself, the money will follow.
Actions speak louder than words.
If you're as good as you think you are, the money will follow, right? But you have to work hard for it.
Correct.
I when I started in the security guard business, that first job that I told you that I had, I was making, you know, $10 an hour, scheduling guards. That's what I was doing. Um,
Mhm.
but it was a start, and I learned the guard business from the bottom up. I dealt with all the guards. I dealt with their schedules. That means I dealt with call offs, the issues, the client issue, all that stuff. And I was
Mhm.
making $10 an hour, and I was basically working 24 hours a day because I was on call for anything that took place. When the guard that was supposed to be there at 12 midnight didn't show up, my pager went off. That was back in the day of pagers, which you're probably saying, what the heck's a pager, right? but
I know what it is.
but you know but I stuck it out, okay, and I learned the guard business. And when I left that company and went to Royce, I got hired at Royce at what I considered at that time a good salary, okay,
Mhm.
way more than the $10 per hour that I was making as a guard scheduler for the first company. But I learned the business though. I
Mhm.
stuck it out and I stayed there, and and it's worked out pretty well for me.
And that's the difference compared to the generation now. They don't wanna learn the process of certain aspects. They just want to go in and be hot and heavy and then go on to the next and go on to the next. Like you mentioned, and I mentioned as well about the instant gratification. I truly believe that we are in an epidemic where people just frankly just don't want to work or they want to get to the top without doing anything in between. Right?
Yeah.
There's a process between A to B. You can't go from A straight to B. Right? There's a linear process that goes within those certain aspects. Given what you've been in this industry for almost 30 years. You've seen cycles, consolidation, regulatory shifts, and the client expectations, especially now within Metro, has evolved enormously. I'd assume it's more so with Metro based on the data surveillance that you do compared to Royce, but nevertheless, looking back on the decisions that define your career, your business, and even your personal life, what's one principle that you wish you trusted earlier? And what would that be now? How would you be able to apply it when you were making those certain big calls within Royce, Metro, or even what you have within American holding standards?
Well, I mean, you know, what I would say to myself, 20 years ago is, trust, the process.
Mhm,
There were many times as soon as something started to change was maybe in my perception was changing, for the worse, you like immediately you want to think of like a new way to do something, right? When you actually know what you're doing is right, you got to give it time. You got to give it a momentum and traction, for it to work. But there were many times where I probably shifted gears too quickly and too frequently
mhm,
instead of, staying focused on, the process and what I knew was the right way in the back of my mind. And frankly, sometimes what I was good at, find an area in your business or in your job that you're really good at, and then trust it then because you have confidence in yourself that that I'm really good at this. So trust the process. See it through. Don't change gears. so fast.
It's very hard to distinguish when to keep pushing forward or when to pivot.
Very
It
hard. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
very hard in the moment, but looking back, you sometimes, especially me, for example, you wish that you just kept on pushing and not pivoting. But I mean, you don't know within that moment, like based on what you had at that time, data wise, you made the decision that you thought was best within your company.
Right.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. There's so many
Yeah.
people that face the regret, but given where you are right now, you still have a roof over your head, mouths to feed, a family, and you're running multiple businesses. So even though those pivots may have not been beneficial in the long scheme of things, it still worked out in the end. I mean, you're still
Well, you gotta,
kicking.
yeah. Well, you have to learn from those, right? As long
Correct.
as you learn something from them, and I think most people will say that we learn more from failures, right, than we do from wins, right? So you
I
got to
agree.
take that, but and in running a business, okay, people that don't run a business, okay, they think that a business owner just has it made, right? They own their own business, they're their own boss, they must have lots of money, right? That they can do whatever they want, right? Um, but that's not true, right? I mean, running a business is hard. Okay. That's why most people, you know, don't do it, right? Because running a business is hard. I don't think people realize sometimes how hard it is
Mhm.
to run a business. Um, and I always say that, you know, running a business, you have to know that bad things are going to happen. Okay. Things are going to go wrong. There's going to be a lot of failures. Something's going to happen, something that you think was, going great, smooth sailing. And then, shit happens, right? Bad things are going to happen. I like to say that what matters though is what you do next. Okay.
Mhm.
That's really what matters because the bad is going to happen. Running a business is hard. Things aren't always going to work. Decisions that you make sometimes are going to be the wrong decisions and they're going to cause you problems for making those bad decisions, right? But what do you do next? And I think, personally that I've gotten really good at the what you do next part of it, right? And I mean, I I don't want to use the word that I accept that bad things are going to happen. You try to, minimize those things. But I'm also smart enough now, 30 years later, to know that bad things are still going to happen. But what do you do next?
Mhm.
That's what I focus on. The what you do next, because it's going to happen.
It's just putting the right foot forward and keep on going. Even there might be some days where you do a little bit. Those little actions build up into the building blocks and build into habits, right?
Yes.
There's so many people that are afraid to fail, afraid to make mistakes. But as you mentioned, in order to actually grow, you're bound to make those mistakes. May not be today, may not be tomorrow, may not be next month, but you are bound to make those mistakes, whether it's in the business, on the fulfillment side, sales side, operations side, or even within your personal life. You're bound to make mistakes. It just depends on what are you going to do within that moment. There's a difference between people that think of all the bad mistakes and don't do anything about it and people that just go into it. Those action oriented individuals are the ones that are successful. I mean, look at the prominent figures within business, within politics. They didn't just go into it being scared, even though they were scared, they were nervous, they still put one foot forward and they believed in themselves. They had the confidence, as you mentioned. As long as you believe in yourself, you have the confidence, that's all you really need.
Well, yeah, Kevin, that's a great point because listen, I don't care who says differently, but we're all scared of something, right? Growing a business and making the decisions that you make in order to scale, whether that's you know more dollars in investments, taking on partners or taking on loans or lending, borrowing, I should say, or just, decisions that you have to make in your business. Number one, it's first to survive
Mhm.
and then to grow. Those are scary, right? I mean, some of those decisions are scary. And when you're small, okay, like I was at one point, and every decision is your own, okay, when you don't have like a team, that I do now, it's daunting sometimes that every decision is yours. And when those decisions go wrong, it's only me to look at, right? It's my face in the mirror. Um, but for me, it's really about my my desire to be successful is way more than my fear of failure.
Mhm.
Okay, and I have fear, of course I do, but the desire to win is way more than my fear of failure.
That's beautiful. That's a very excellent mindset to have because it just really shows that you just got to keep on pushing in order to get the desire, the outcome that you want. Before we wrap up here, for anyone who's listening or watching this and wants to connect with you, Royce, or even Metro, what's the best place for them to reach out to you and your organizations?
LinkedIn is always, pretty simple, place to reach out. So
All right,
you can
beautiful.
always find me there. Yeah.
Joe, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time and you coming on to the show and discussing about your business. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Kevin, thanks for having me, man. It was fun. I
My
appreciate
my
that.
pleasure. My pleasure.